Here are some crazy facts about the world's nuclear arsenal. Take a look. For one, America doesn't have the most. They have 3,700. Russia is actually the number one holder at 4,309 so far as of January of 2025. Now, in the 1960s, the United States something called variable yield nukes, in which you're able to dial in how much destruction you want the bomb to cause. So the lowest yield is about 1/50th of what was done to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the highest could be several times higher. The Russians copied that tech and they had it by the 1970s. Now, China only has 600, but that's still quite a nuclear power. Then you have France and the UK, and you'll see India, Pakistan, this country, and then North Korea. But you'll see Germany doesn't, and that's because still of World War II. But something that nobody talks about is how expensive it is to maintain these nuclear weapons. The US, with its massive stockpile, has to spend $80 billion a year to maintain all of these weapons. One thing we all have to remember is that missiles and the nuclear warheads attached to them are encased in metal, mainly stainless steel. And guess what? That oxidizes or rusts. It doesn't matter how well you store these weapons, there is always going to be moisture in the air. And once that happens, after a few months or even a few years, rust will start to form. And it is very expensive to get rid of that rust or just develop a new casing for that weapon. Then is something called metal fatigue, which is something that will happen to any piece of metal, especially over the decades, which Russia clearly has had to deal with. Even if metal doesn't rust with moisture in the air, the constant fluctuations of moisture and then dryness over several years will start to form corrosive pits in even the strongest bit of steel. Then, of course, are the pressure changes, which make the corrosion pits worse. But another thing, a lot of these nuclear weapons have to be transported, and all of that added together stresses the metal to the point of degradation, even if it isn't rust. And we are just talking about the surface of the warhead and the missile, but then there's the actual decomposition of the components inside the missile, like the tritium. Tritium is an isotope of hydrogen, which is the lightest element on the periodic table. It normally has an atomic weight of 1, but tritium, even though it is hydrogen, it has an atomic weight of 3, so it's 3 times heavier than the hydrogen, and that is what makes the fusion bomb so much more effective. It really adds the extra boom and huge radius of destruction compared to other fission-based bombs. While the radioactive material in the bomb, like the plutonium or the uranium, may have a half-life of 50 million years or 100 million years, the tritium only has a half-life of about 12. And not 12 million years, I mean 12 years. So yeah, if these guys aren't maintained in 12 years, then boom, you have less of this fuel to deliver the payload that you're trying to. Let's hope nobody ever has to. That's a horrible thing. But remember, these nuclear weapons aren't really meant to destroy, they're meant to be a deterrent. And then there is maintaining the actual propulsion system of these missiles. The fuel, which, yes, these weapons are actually stored on the missiles with the fuel in them, well, the fuel starts to decompose after 10 to 15 years. And not only does the fuel start to degrade in quality, but it also begins to eat away the casing of the actual missile. Now, some of you may be wondering, hey, GeoHusar, why are you mentioning the degradation of parts of the missile and the warhead between 10 to 15 years? Because even before the Soviet Union fell in 1991, they did not have the money and resources to maintain all of their weapons. Like I mentioned before, the United States spends about $80 billion a year maintaining its nukes. Well, before 2022, 80 billion a year was the entirety of Russia's military budget. And then after the collapse in 1991, there was about a 10-year period of total instability within that country, and adherence to maintenance of these weapons wasn't paid attention to in any way, shape, or form. So yes, while Russia has more nuclear weapons on paper than the United States, we have more that actually work. So the Russian government can't even be sure how many of their warheads will actually detonate, how many of their missiles can actually launch, and then how many of their missiles can actually make it out of Russia to hit their target. Now, the last thing I want to mention to you about nuclear weapons is the fact that this is old technology. The nuke was developed in 1944 or 1945. So, okay, that's about 80 years. So let's go 80 years before 1945. The most powerful and destructive weapon at the time was most likely some kind of cannon. So in 80 years, we go from cannon to nuclear weapon that can destroy an entire city. So I want to know what has been developed in 2025, 80 years after we came up with the nuke. I don't think it's a drone or anything we actually know about. I wouldn't be surprised if DARPA had it, and I think the only time we would actually see it is if some country were reckless enough to actually try to launch a nuke. I am the Geo Husar, and let me know if you don't know the difference between fission and fusion. Thanks for watching.